Hello and welcome to yet another InsideBE webinar. I hope you can all hear me, you can all see me. Please let me know in the comments in the chat window if everything is fine. Last time we had Nuala Walsh over, the time before we had Rachel Altman. Both shared really interesting insights, really interesting case studies. And today I am really particularly glad to be able to welcome Jez Groom. Jez, who founded Cowry Consulting, one of the, I would say, most innovative behavioral consultancies out there. They're doing an amazing job. I was just telling everybody how amazing job you're doing, and especially since we launched InsideBE, we had the chance to be in touch a little bit more, and we were able to learn a little bit more about what you do. And I truly find your work very inspiring and very eye-opening, also for us as behavioral experts. So, yes, welcome, and thanks a lot for being here.
No, and thanks very much for that introduction. So, yeah, I mean, I think we're all very, very fortunate to have, fascinating jobs, So I think it was hard to try and kickstart the area, but I think now as a proven kind of strategic and tactical sort of tool or software, as we were talking about, it's there, it's working. So no, it's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to be in this domain and working in this domain.
I was wondering, I went to your LinkedIn just before starting the webinar, and I saw that you studied biochemistry. So can you share what was your story, how you got from biochemistry to, I guess, advertising, and then later on behavioral science?
Yeah, because I think it's come full circle, so with hopefully not too many leaps. But I think, I mean, I was fascinated, and that's why I think for all the ills of the pandemic, but I was fascinated by molecular biology and some of the concepts. So I still think it's crazy that we have sort of 4 basic units of code that create us, so DNA, is an amazing thing, and it creates proteins, and from those proteins we create, I suppose, life. And I still don't understand it fully. I don't think anybody does, but it was just fascinating. So I really enjoyed it, but I was rubbish in the laboratory. So I was really messy. So I used to spill things. I used to, use micro pipettes, because obviously when you're dealing with small samples, it's microliters. And so I knew it wasn't going to be a career for me, although I really enjoyed it as an undergrad. And so I came out and I'd done some work in London, just sort of temporary work. Really enjoyed London. I've been very fortunate to travel around the world with work. But I really love working in London because it is so multicultural, lots of things going on. I've really enjoyed that. And then I didn't fall into advertising. So people say sometimes say they fell into advertising, but I really thought quite long and hard about what I wanted to do. And I was really fascinated by Campaign magazine, but also kind of, I suppose, some of the persuasion and influence sort of campaigns. And I've been fascinated by some of those insights. So I really wanted to get a job, and I didn't get the first job. I got refused, but I was overqualified, and then I got a second job role in a small agency, and then I was very fortunate to work in one of the most, I suppose, one of the best advertising agencies there's ever been, certainly in the 90s, which is Bartle Bogle Hegarty. So I was there when there was 150 people, that magical number, and it was amazing. And then throughout that career, increasingly started to work and be more strategic, and worked on campaigns for things like, I don't know, Levi's, alcohol brands like Stella Artois, Häagen-Dazs, first ice cream to really advertise on television, things like that. And I was fascinated by the psychology sort of behind it. And we worked on behavioral change campaigns. So it wasn't called nudge theory, it wasn't called behavioral economics, but it was called behavioral change in the UK. So we started doing some work in that sort of area, and for the government, as part of an advertising brief. And I was very fortunate to be at the right place, the right time. And then, Nudge and nudge unit, and then got caught up in that sort of whirlwind. So and decided to see if we could do it in the private sector. So one of the things that I'm not very good at is working in the public sector, but I think we're pretty good in the private sector, the more commercial side of behaviour change. And so we set up Cowry, and coming back full circle. I think what's really interesting, especially now after the pandemic, is we are a biological being. So minute traces of small elements can have massive effects on who we are and how we behave. And I think that's really interesting around the replication crisis and context right now, that I don't believe that all the replicated studies that are being replicated, I don't believe the context actually is mirrored all the time to its absolute finite detail. I think some details which were being missed and were making incorrect conclusions to say, well, it was exactly the same, experiment on experiment, so therefore it can't be true. And I'm not so sure, because I think there's more to learn about context and how that sets behaviour. And I think there's some wacko behavioural science out there that I don't believe in, but I also think there's some interesting sort of challenges that currently that I don't think are necessarily on as firm ground as some of the mathematicians would have us believe. So full circle. So small trace elements in biology can affect behaviour. It's not a new concept. Maybe it's for mathematicians, I don't know.
I'm a mathematician by education.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not that concerned about the replication crisis, because I think at the core of what we believe in is basically science as inspiration, not science as a silver bullet which will solve your challenge, the moment you apply it. I think it gives us amazing hypotheses, but the context is so different in every single situation that you have to test it, you have to try it out. And also those experiments that were not replicated or are not always replicated, I think there's a lot that you can learn from them, and a lot of inspiration that you can gain from just looking at the way of the scientists were thinking about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think there is some wonky data and there is some wacko science out there for sure. I also think there's a really, really robust pool of work, and then I think there's some work which is in between, which isn't as robust enough yet because we don't understand it. And I think people are confusing the wacko wonky with maybe the stuff that's in the middle. So I'm with you. I think the replication crisis is hyperbole. I think it just requires more experimentation. And as you say, that's what science is about. That it progresses. Somebody said it's social science research works painfully slow. I sort of go, okay, well, if you want to run at 100 miles an hour with algorithms, fine, but humans aren't run on algorithms. So you're gonna have to be patient. So
yeah, absolutely. So another thing I learned on LinkedIn is that you are more than 25 at Cowry, and it's not all behavioral scientists and psychologists. So what is the kind of people that you work with, the kind of people who are within your teams, and how do you combine all those different expertise into functioning teams?
Yeah, no, that's really, really good. So I think we'll be at 30 full-time employees by January, and they are all psychologists or economists with a master's or a PhD behavioral science. And I think, obviously Nuala was on last week, and a kind of founding member of GABS, that I think, the legitimization of the profession, the bar has been set broadly at a master's level. And also as well, within that, the team does have different skills. So we've got behavioral data science people. So I think Warwick are doing a pretty good job, I think, of combining behavioral science and data. So that's a good pool there. I think we've got quite a lot. I think it's the easiest sort of role to find, I think, is kind of more of a strategist or an architect, whereas people come out of maybe a master's program and they have good understanding of the principles, and they're good strategic thinkers. So I think that's one skill. I often find like the economists, so going back to your mathematician, so the economists who sort of overlay that with the behavioral science masters tend to be our experimental and our senior experimental designers. So we've got 2 economists and 1 mathematician that have got behavioral science masters from Stirling, Warwick and City. And they do the heavy quant on the experimental sort of design. And then the final piece, which is a huge gap, you know, I'm working with the guys at City University to kind of augment the program. Is I think the behavior. I mean, we've talked about this at length, but I think it's worth sort of dramatizing it a bit more. Is that the behavioral science community, I don't think, are very good designers, right? And I want to qualify that. Because I think there's a lot of books and people who are positioning themselves as behavioral designers, and they're designing strategies for change. Ultimately, they're not responsible for the coding, you know, or they're not responsible for the sketch, you know, or the Figma. You know, essentially they brief into a graphic designer or a product designer or a service designer to actually bring those ideas to life. And we found at Cowry that essentially creates a dilution of the idea, and sometimes a distraction or a divergence from the core idea, because we've tried it, because you hand it over to somebody who doesn't understand the science, and things come back not quite right, and you have to go back and say, actually, it needs to be this and that. So Rafi March, who's our chief design officer, is a psychologist, but she studied undergrad, like perception psychology, and sort of did a dissertation in that area. So we are training people in sort of the Adobe suite, and to the point of kind of redlining for digital assets, where they're actually designing things. So without the need for a graphic design team. And I think that is, you know, that's what we think behavioral design is. You know, so if someone said, could you build a prototype of an app so it looked and felt as if it could be coded from that point, you know, someone could look at it and then code it, then yeah. And I just don't think there's many people in behavioral science. And then they do that. And then the final one is behavioral researchers. So I think some brilliant behavioral research businesses, behavioral architects, behavioralists, I think are pretty good in the UK, where and we're I think lower down that ranking at Cowry, where we're more a consulting business rather than a research business predominantly, but we're trying to meet that balance. So yeah, how we bring them all together is in, you know, interdisciplinary teams. So in each of the teams we have an architect, designer, and an experimental designer, and they're augmented by a researcher to fill the gaps depending on what insight exists, and they're client focused. So, you know, we have a number of, well, quite a lot now of drawdown retained clients across the year, and yeah, those guys go into those businesses. So yeah, and it's you know, it's not happened overnight. You know, we've been going for 6 years. I learned a lot when I set the business up at Ogilvy with Rory about how to do this, and yeah, no, we're really pleased with the progress that we're making so far, but a lot more work to do.
So let's now have a look at what those interdisciplinary teams can actually produce. So what is it that you will talk about? So what is this case study that increased engagement eightfold?
Yeah, so one of the I suppose we have 4 propositions at Cowry about sort of 4 services that we offer, and we call them dig, fix, teach, and build. And digging is subconscious insights, you know, implicit research, more system 1 techniques, that whole gamut of those. Fixing is often where I think behavioral science starts within an organization. So that is when a client says to you, look, I've got this process which isn't working. So it might be an onboarding process for a client, or it might be some form of complaints procedure, or it might be some internal employee experience, kind of, you know, people aren't sharing as much as they should be doing. So there is a legacy process, a legacy system, a legacy interaction, and that has to be optimized. And we call that fix. So essentially you go in and tweak and change, but we don't essentially sort of transform it from first principle. Teach is what obviously you're experts in as well, InsideBE, and essentially that's building capability, and there's a lot of work being done in organizations. But build is really interesting, where it's baking behavioral science into new propositions and new products and services. And that is really, really exciting, like really, really exciting, because It's so frustrating to see teams sprint and build things without behavioral science, because 6 months to 12 months later, often the client is disappointed with maybe not enough people adopting the new digital platform, or the onboarding process being suboptimal and people dropping out of the process, and then actually going back to other channels and creating failure demand. So I think where we are as a business, we think that fixing and teaching has a finite lifespan. So the capability will be built, I don't know, 5, 10 years, who knows? And ultimately, the behavioral science contributions will be insight and innovation. I think that's where we are. So this particular case study, I think, is kind of one of those first kind of big strides into how do you work with a new technology and bake behavioral science principles into it from the very first instance, and be involved in the very first meetings, and be kind of at the start of the process, which we were on this particular piece of work.
Right. Well, Jez, floor is yours. I'll now go away, and we'll be careful listening to the fascinating case study. Speak soon.
Thank you. Cool. Okay, well, I will share my screen.
Mm-hmm.
I always think people say when they are usually doing this, which we've heard quite a lot, and I'll get rid of the hide. So hopefully that is all working. So I just want to set the scene a little bit. Behavioral science, certainly within the commercial sector, has got some real sort of key deployments by sector. So Cowry Consulting, Cowry is the cowrie shells were the earliest recorded form of money. That's why we call the business Cowry, because we thought that was a psychological sort of turning point, an inflection point that caused quite a lot of problems. And we focused a lot of our efforts in 2015, when we sort of started the business, in the financial services sector. So that's why we call Cowry Consulting. And a lot of our work is still to this day is being done in sort of the savings, investments, pensions market. And one of those companies is Aegon. So predominantly, I suppose, European, with a really, really strong UK arm based in Scotland, and also sort of in Peterborough and other parts of the country like Essex. And then also part of a bigger group with companies sort of worldwide. And what's really interesting about these brands is that they're not particularly consumer facing. They're often intermediated by either a financial advisor or through your company. So your company might have Aegon as a provider of your pension. For those of you that have pensions, you may have quite a distant relationship with your pension provider. It's often done through your HR department. And this is one of these businesses, and they had a real drive to be like a lot of financial services, more customer centric, both to kind of corporate and consumer customer. One of the, I suppose, it took us about 3 years really to do a lot of fixing on broken things to start to get into the slipstream of building and being involved at the forefront of innovation. And this was one of those particular sort of projects. So I'm just going to start off and I suppose ask some questions, and wouldn't be right. And it'd be interesting, I suppose, in the audience that some of you might not be homeowners yet. I'm sort of aware of that. But those of you who are homeowners, you may have just taken a mortgage or have a mortgage. It's a significant kind of commitment. But how many of you kind of can know the value of your house? It might be to the nearest sort of 10,000 euros or $10,000 or 10,000 pounds or other currencies. But people generally have got a good understanding of where that is, because it costs a lot of money. And as you start to pay off the debt, then it becomes a significant asset. But if I asked you another question, which was, how many of you know how much is in your pension? Like right now, I think that's quite a struggle. So people often don't know how much is in their pension, and they have a very, very distant sort of passive relationship, and that's a problem. And essentially, as we start to live longer, it's my belief that we do need to have an active engagement with our future finances. We don't necessarily need to become a financial advisor, but we do need to have some sort of rules of thumb about how much we think we might need for what type of lifestyle we might want, and what those numbers might be, and whether we're on track or not. I don't think that's something which is, out of the realms of people that have got, generally a good sort of school education. And what's interesting is the reason why people don't engage with their pension is often it's one interaction a year. You get sent a piece of paper, or in this case, reams and reams. This is one statement, this is a dramatization, but often it might be like 20 or 30 pages of paper, which they have to send out to you for a compliance perspective, which we know nobody reads. So 95% of you, me, us, don't read the annual pension statement. And so we're just not engaged with that. And we think that's a problem from a psychological sort of perspective, but also, from a climate, we're sending out all of this information to make sure we've got some form of security blanket, when actually we're pulling the rug under some quite big issues that should be able to be solved through more digital technologies, not for every customer group, but for the majority of the customer groups with which we interact with. So, I suppose the real sort of, dilemma, crises, worry, is that our brains just aren't programmed to think about the future. So I know there's a lot of practitioners and people that understand these insights, that we just find it really, really hard to engage with something which is in the future, potentially ambiguous, and potentially complex. And that means we don't. And surely, I think where we strive is to go, can we change that? And, I suppose at this point, one of the things that really, really, captured my imagination was the Save More Tomorrow pension scheme from Shlomo and Thaler that kick-started nudge theory, at scale, so huge amount of contributions. And I guess it works for certain cohorts of people. So, if you're going to stay with the same employer for 30 years, then of course, when you're 23, you can say, I want to put more in. And when I get paid more, I'll put a big proportion in. You can say that. That's under the assumption that, you're going to be with that same sort of company and with the same pension provider for, here till 2052. It's kind of like, it seems like maybe, if you're working for the government, that would work. But maybe if you're working in tech companies, maybe that would be inappropriate. And then similarly, there are markets where you can move your pension around, it's transportable. So you can actually just switch company to company, but you're still paying into the same plan. And again, I think if you could align smart with that program, it would be great. But in the UK, it's just not the case that when you shift employer, more often than not, there will be a different pension provider. So you start to acquire different pension pots from lots and lots of different employers. So, by the age of maybe 30, you might already have like 4 or 5 different pension pots. And often the relationship you have with them is based on an employer. So they're my work pension. So when you ask people, about their pension, they often say, yeah, that's my work pension. And it's, if you work in sort of pharmaceuticals, you might say that's my Glaxo pension, and I've also got my Merck pension. So people refer to them as actually not their own pensions, but maybe somebody else's. So what we wanted to do was utilize kind of the broader suite of behavioral science, pulling in insights from lots and lots of different places to essentially translate all of that complex words and numbers into pictures, and paint essentially a story that we can sort of engage with in the way that our brains really, really enjoy and engage with themselves. So let's make it sort of relevant to them, and let's utilize behavioral science to start to sort of, I suppose, deliver that sort of level of engagement, and talk to people in a way that they get excited about it, in a way that a financial services brand maybe traditionally wouldn't talk to customers. So I suppose what I'm going to talk about sort of now is kind of the science behind, and it'd be great to have some questions towards the end, also as well as the size and scale of the project. Like when I first started working in sort of behavioral science, nudge theory, behavioral economics, it was interesting because it was often seen as tweaks and tactical, small for big effects. One small change on a tax sort of text or a tax letter from the government can deliver huge rewards. But I think what we're now beginning to understand is that actually, the government has the opportunity to do that, because often the services they provide are for the entire population. So one small change in a service can have a huge difference. But if you're working on an organization perspective, like in the commercial sector, they might only represent 5 or 10 or 15% of any sort of given market. And so to deliver this kind of the ROIs, it's often utilizing multiple different principles in combination, and creating an ecosystem of lots and lots of different behavioral science sort of principles, and then delivering that across an entire journey, rather than maybe just one letter. It might be, in the case of some of the work we've done, people like Sky, it might be over 300 different types of letter. So I'll talk a little bit about the size and the scale of the project, because, I really, really do believe that, big behavioral science in big business is something that we can now talk about confidently. It's not always about one small thing that can have, an effect. And actually, I think that is quite misleading to think that the silver bullet and it's going to work with demonstrable effect. And in this case, we packed these videos full of principles, which I'll talk through, and we did get really, really good results. My worry would have been, if we'd have just done one at a time, would we have got the traction and the levels of engagement, at the very start? I doubt it. So I'll talk through some of that. So I'm just going to talk through, I suppose, the science behind. So, some of these principles people will be very, very familiar with. And some of them may need a little bit of unpacking. And I'll talk about the broader suite, kind of at an outline, sort of high level. And then I'll go through 3 particular principles, which are more oblique and lateral and quite different. And specifically, this was, somebody in, I suppose, a company that was getting this video. That what we wanted to do was essentially engage with the communication and engage with the experience, if you like. But also what we wanted to do was make sure that, I suppose, that they were starting to do things. So not just looking at things, but do things and change their behavior as a result, to increase the retention, so people felt good about it from an experience perspective, but actually do things which are beneficial for them and also beneficial for the company. And those 2 things weren't mutually exclusive, so good outcomes for both parties. So the broader suite was, we actually put in 36 different behavioral science principles into the 4-minute films. Not in every one, because as you'll see a little bit later, there were 250,000 different variants. But some of them are really simple. And I was chatting, I think it was in a recent behavioral science book club session, about, I'm more intrigued and more confident that we use essentially a robust suite of more repeatable over time. And one of them, is endowment effect. So, I talked earlier about having a pension. It's often referred to as your company pension. And but actually, it is your pension. So if we highlight this sense of ownership to capture attention, then people are going to think, oh, it is fine, it is relevant, and they're going to value it more. So these are really, really simple, I think, very repeatable, very replicable sort of examples within behavioral science that just aren't used as much and as well as they could be. Also as well, I think we've got here sort of communicate what part of the pension journey the customer is on. So just managing expectations about kind of where they are in the process of their pension sort of contributions. And number 8 is use plain, simple language for cognitive easing. As we know, there's a huge temptation, especially with compliance in financial services, is to use technical jargon. And it's brilliant. So, I didn't know much about pension jargon when we started working in this area. I mean, I've been working in the industry for about 12, 13 years in pensions. And it's, it's fascinating. But for most people, actually, they don't need to know that. And actually, words they don't understand, or words that they've never come across before can often confuse people and get people to disengage. So I'm just going to focus on, I suppose, 3 principles that I think really sort of stand out. And, you know, one of the things that we often say is in terms of how can we increase customer retention and sales, it's kind of like what have birdsong and Call of Duty got to do with sort of pension sort of videos. So I'm going to leave you hanging just for a second, because in true I suppose pandemic Zoom-ish style, my dog is just here and she wants to go back out, so I'm just gonna let her out for a second. So birdsong, Call of Duty, and then something quite, well, I think it's quite funny in terms of I suppose the difference between numbers and pictures. So the first one is birdsong. So what has birdsong got to do with pension sort of video summaries? So I'm just going to play you sort of a short clip, and hopefully it's enjoyable. And this is some birdsong. So what's interesting about birdsong is essentially we just find it quite relaxing and reassuring. And when we're building and choreographing customer experiences, especially when people might be feeling anxious or nervous or a bit uncertain about what they're going to see, what they're going to do for the first time, then how can we use that? And we used it within the videos very naturally to essentially give this sense of reassurance and get people to feel at ease before they were going to engage with this content. And I'd seen this insight. It was from a guy called Julian Treasure, who did a TED talk. It was way back when, and he was talking about the kind of the evolutionary psychology that kind of sits behind it. So I'm just going to let Julian talk a little bit about, I suppose, that and why it is that we do feel at ease.
Birdsong, for example, is a sound which most people find reassuring. There's a reason for that. Over hundreds of thousands of years, we've learned that when the birds are singing, things are safe. It's when they stop you need to be worried.
So what's really interesting about that, and that's from a TED talk, when I suppose TED Talks were TED Talks, and it was just really sort of struck me that, you know, I think priming, for example, has really got in for a hammering on the replication sort of crisis. And I do think there's some wonky science in some aspects of that. But I think in this instance, you know, it feels like you're hearing some form of sound that makes you feel at ease. And the reason why is because if the birds are around, it means that the predators aren't around. And then that makes you feel safe and reassured. And, you know, what's interesting about certain things, can we use these types of techniques? So you know, I'm definitely in the case of let's not keep promoting stuff which we don't think is particularly helpful, but I do think that there are some aspects, I think, around subconscious noises and textures, smells, and things which we might see, which maybe do have some kind of primal role which we don't quite understand sometimes, that is hard to replicate because maybe the context isn't the case. But anyway, intriguing. One of the 36. Do I think this is the most powerful of all of the 36 principles? No. You know, do I think it's the, you know, going to work on everybody? No. But is it something that we can add to the other 35 that can essentially enhance that at the start of the customer experience? Then yes, absolutely. The second one is one that I said was quite funny. Well, I think it's quite funny. And I never thought I'd do a presentation to financial services, I suppose, professionals in customer experience, talking about the fact that size really does matter. And size does matter. You know, this is obviously the very famous illusion about sort of context and relative framing of things and how we essentially utilize kind of visual cues. It is really important. And you know, when we take the context away, they both look the same. But when we go back again, then one looks smaller than the other. You know, so this isn't anything new. We're not pretending it is. But what is fascinating is when we see numerical values go up on a pension statement, the font size stays the same. So even though your pension pot might be an order of magnitude of 10 or 20 or 50 times more than when you first started saving into it, the font size will always be 12 on a paper statement. And that just dramatizes, it doesn't make it easier to understand what that shift has been. And so one of the things that we look to do within the films is when things get bigger, then make them bigger, and we can do that. The final sort of oblique and lateral sort of principle was, I suppose, what we learned from the gaming industry. So some of you might be fans of Call of Duty. Certainly I've got 3 teenage boys, they play Redemption. And these games are, so immersive because they put you into the middle of the action. They create, I suppose, this sense of being in there. And actually start to trigger quite a lot of those neural sort of networks and pathways to get us to a better place in terms of what we want to do, because we feel like we're in the space. And that's why these games, I think, are so, I wouldn't say addictive. I think that for some people, for sure, some of these games can be overplayed and it can be addictive. But I think for other people, they can take them or leave them. But I think they're enjoyable and engaging because they do have a lot of psychology sort of baked into, I suppose, a lot of the objectives of the games and the way that the games work. And one of the things that we considered from a design perspective was, why don't we make these videos and put them in first person perspective so people feel like they're in the middle of the action. And this is kind of like a game, but also it's been used in, I suppose, in other aspects. And this is a short film about someone utilizing VR to essentially climb up a wall, but they're not climbing up at all.
Yeah. Oh, it freaks me out when I look down. Oh, it feels so high. Okay, right. Oh God, I've got to climb. I sort of know that it's not real, but when you initially look down, oh my God, it's terrifying. Oh, I don't know where to go. Oh, it's the going down bit. It's making my knees feel funny. Really? Yeah. Okay.
So you found your route now?
So as she was going down, her knees felt funny, even though she was standing, on a flat surface. So utilizing some of these insights within the film is going to be critical to get people to engage and do things. So in terms of the size and scale of the project, so we started off with a pilot of 100,000 customers, then we rolled out 600,000 customers, and now millions of customers, soon to be more millions of customers as it gets transported around the Aegon businesses around the world. In terms of the approach that we went through, we started off with, I suppose, just scientific method, which was doing an audit of what videos had appeared before in terms of personalization. So people like Tesco Clubcard have done some great work in this area. There've been some work done by an independent financial advisor, a kind of a basic level of personalization. We looked at the regulators. So the FCA had created some good guardrails around how we, I suppose, make communication smart for customers in the UK. We then created a literature review of what we thought would be some really, really strong guiding principles for all of the teams. That's the technology team, the data team, and the creative team alongside the client. We identified kind of key behavioral markers of different segments. So how old they were, what funds they were invested in, how much they had in their fund, whether they'd actually pooled and brought together their pension pots. And then we then got into high levels of personalization based on those segments. And then whilst we didn't create the videos, a creative agency illustrated them. The data team essentially created the back-end engine to populate the videos, and then a technology platform dynamically renders them. I still don't know how they do it. Dynamically renders them in real time to create these 4-minute videos. And then we then sort of designed sort of I suppose ultimately what got people into these videos. And these videos were in a secure environment, so you couldn't access them. You couldn't send a link to someone and people could look at your video. It would be like within a banking platform. In this case, it was like within the pension platform. And it was really personalized on a few different levels. And this was kind of like a basic personalization based on some of these dimensions. But even with those just simple dimensions, there were over 250,000 different sort of unique messaging variations based on those sort of dynamics, so that their age and investment class and what decisions they'd made. So I suppose in summary, we have to send these out to customers, and because it's compliant. And but as you can see, it's not the most engaging thing that we can get people to look at maybe once a year. So instead of doing this, we created these videos, and it goes on for 4 minutes. There's a lot of discussion about whether customers would actually watch the whole video, and the vast majority of people did. So hopefully you will enjoy this too.
Hello, Robbie. Welcome to your Aegon Personalised Pension Summary. We've made this video especially for you, where we'll cover details about your pension, such as your contributions, your fund, and what your pension pot might be when you come to retire. We've put all of this information and more into your yearly statement, which will be with you on your policy anniversary. At your current age, we can see that now is an important time to continue building your pension. For now, make yourself comfortable and let's take a look at what's been happening with your pension over the last 12 months. So, here's what you've invested and here's what your employer has invested in that time. And as you know, you contribute through salary sacrifice, so you've helped to boost your pension pot. Which means the value of your pension pot is currently at this amount. It seems like your employer contributing to your pension is a valuable benefit. Additionally, you also have the payments you've made into your ISA. This is currently where you are in your pension journey. You can see how far you have to go to retirement, so bear this in mind when considering your decisions and attitude to risk going forward. As it stands, you're on track at an age of 65 to potentially receive a pot of this amount when you come to retire, which equates to a pension income of this amount each year. If this doesn't match your expectations, you may want to consider reviewing your retirement savings. You should use the goal planner to see what changes could make a difference, like increasing your contributions. You should think about your lifestyle choices for when you come to retire, remembering that your pension pot is there to last for your whole retirement. So that's everything from your day-to-day spending, such as your groceries, to holidays and enjoying days out. At the moment, we can see you've decided to switch out of the scheme's default fund, and it looks like you've made some active decisions. It's important you continue to review your investment choices to make sure they meet your goals, your lifestyle, and your attitude to risk. You should also check your contribution levels because any increase could make a difference. Just remember, the more you save now, the quicker you may reach your retirement goals. If you have more than one pot, it might be worth bringing them together. If you wish to make any changes, simply log on to your secure online account. Remember, this is your pension, you own it. So, it's important that you review your investment choice. If you have more than one pot, consider bringing them together and think about increasing your contributions, as this is an important time for you to continue building your pension. You'll find all the necessary links on this page to help you complete your next step. Thanks for watching.
So hopefully that was sort of four minutes that didn't feel like 4 minutes, and especially if it was relevant for you. I don't think there's many people who are age 42 called Robbie and work at Edinburgh Council on the call or on the webinar. But you can see how it really draws you in and takes you on quite a gentle journey of, I suppose, simple concepts that kind of build over time. But critically, does it change behavior? Do we essentially retain customers, engage with our existing customers, and do they do things as a result which is advantageous to them and us? And what we found was, rather than sort of 5% engagement levels, we're up at this sort of 41% of people opening them up. Of those, 85%, so I said it was the vast majority, 85% were happy to go and watch like a 4-minute video about them and their pension. It was new and novel for sure. Is that going to continue? Who knows? So that's often often the challenge with new technologies that they seem to lose their I suppose attraction. But again, there's a lot more opportunity with newer technologies now. But it was just fascinating to see, the fact that we hadn't been able to get people to engage, but yet we've got a factor of 8-fold. So nearly half of people are starting to look at this. And then what did people do? So people check their goal planner. So you can go onto the platform and say, look, how much money do I think I might need? What type of lifestyle might I need? How much do I need to put in? 8% of people switch funds. So if you're younger, it's often advantageous to be in slightly higher risk funds because you've got a lot of time to invest, maybe 30, 40 years. If you're slightly older, you might go for slightly lower risk funds as you come close to that retirement. And then 12% of people consolidated their pots. They brought their pots together. So they might have 2 or 3 pensions and they brought them on platform. And that essentially creates assets that are managed by Aegon. And even within the, I suppose, the initial kind of pilot, there was 95 additional transactions. And the sums of money are quite huge in pensions. And so we often hear about billions and trillions. But these are the assets that flowed onto platform. And there are, I think it's 22 different ways to calculate the kind of the profit margin for a pension. And but what we find is that, whilst the assets are huge, the percentage commission that the business might make is smaller, but it lasts for a long time. And so even these kind of, I suppose, small changes in lifestyle, maybe a bit more in contribution, it benefits obviously the customer because their financial future is more secure and more aligned with their objectives, but also as well, the company benefits from that and is helping people create these, I suppose, more financially secure sort of futures. So I think that's, I suppose, a fascinating, hopefully insightful sort of introduction to how I think behavioral science can be truly embedded within innovative, in this case, kind of a fintech project. What was really, I suppose, different and exciting for us is we took this and started to enter into, I suppose, CX awards, customer experience awards in the UK and globally, and a pension company was winning sort of market leading awards. So Aegon with us won the British Quality Foundation Customer Experience of Innovation Award. We were a European finalist for the Gartner Award for innovation, which some would be familiar with. We didn't get to the global level. We dropped out kind of the Europe region level. And this was for a pension company. Normally you'd expect like a tech or a media company to do this, but this is like at this point. So I will stop sharing my screen and I think hand over for some questions.
Jez, thanks a lot for sharing all this. It's actually beautiful. And we got a first comment. This is actually an extremely cool idea combined with great personalization. Awesome work. And I totally agree. I have a couple of questions regarding the case study. First of all, what was the behavioral goal that you were trying to achieve with the campaign? Because I can imagine there were quite a few. Not all of them were, linked to direct behavior. So, what was the assignment from the client?
Yeah. I think it was get people to engage with their statement. So, so watch something and consume it, however, what form of media that was in, because that wasn't happening. So getting people to open the email, getting people to then watch the video was critical. Getting people to watch it till the end. Some people did go and watch it 2 or 3 times, by the way. So not the majority, that was in the minority. And then once they've watched the video, then there were some critical, I suppose, objectives that are going to help you. So the first one is often you'll be put into a default fund. And often that is kind of a medium to low risk fund, and it's trying to get people to go, is that right for me? What's my attitude to risk, and what are my goals? So we wanted people to say, look, how much money do I think I might need in the future? And we have a goal planner. So you saw on the behavioral objectives, people did go to their goal planner and start to say, how much money do I think I might need? And it's that is a really, really hard exercise. Do you think you might need 20,000 a year, 40,000 a year, 60,000 a year? Mm-hmm. And then what does that mean to the size of a pension pot? And, a £40,000 salary, albeit most probably at a lower tax regime than I suppose, well, some of it might be a low tax, but £40,000. You need £1 million pension pot in the UK to have £40,000 a year. So people go, wow, right? I didn't think you need to be a millionaire to get what I thought was a reasonable salary in my retirement. So, but often, people don't necessarily have the same commitments, children, mortgages, etc. And then the other one was bringing your pots together. So we're quite concerned that people will have money that they've forgotten about in pension pots, which is theirs, that they rightly should essentially just scoop and sweep it into their current pension. So I think that's a new behaviour, hopefully, that people are going to adopt, which is whenever they change employer or change job, they'll review their pension and then they'll make an active decision to say, is it worthwhile to put it into a different sort of pot or not. And PensionBE, I think, are doing a good job of that, I think, for certain sort of segments of the market. But those are the behavioural objectives. So all based on good things for customers, and the company benefits as a result. And, I think that's, good use of the commercial insights in this instance.
Mm-hmm. So, but the videos were mainly optimized for engagement.
Yeah. So you couldn't. One of the things you couldn't do, which you will be able to do, is start to do things within the video. So essentially, the technology limitations. I mean, I don't want to say that sounds quite harsh, but the limitation is, a 4-minute film created to you in seconds, which pulls through all of your data and multiple sources, puts it into a 4-minute film and looks beautiful, right? But it's a passive, it's a passive film. It's just personalized. The next stage of personalization is engagement within the film, so that what is on the horizon is, would you like to start to look at your planner now? So it might say, Jez, do you want to see how much you might need to increase your contributions to get to £20,000 a year or £30,000 a year? Or do you want to see, essentially, do you want to pay in for longer or shorter, and see how that affects things? So you will be able to interact within a video. And sometimes that might be concierge. So there's some good concierge videos where people essentially are mentoring you through that process. So people are saying, hey, Jez, you've got 3 options that we can look at, 20, 30, 40. Which would you like to look at? You click on the 20, it says, great. Okay, you selected £20,000. Okay, let's see what that looks like. So I think the behaviors, are going to be more and more immersive. And one of the things that I am excited about is micro segmentation and hyper personalization. So we've never been able to do it unless we've got a digital world. But behavioral science and nudge theory, I think you mentioned silver bullet, I think, in the intro, is, we've often thought about behavioral science as predictable, systematic, hardwired, and homogenous. And actually, I don't think it's any of those things consistently. So, I firmly believe that people are very, very different, depending on their individual social and environmental contexts. So actually creating sort of hyper-personalized experience based on you and your behavior sort of types and your world, I think it is a good thing. The worry I have is the ethics around that, because we know as we segment to 1, n equals 1, and we personalize experience and curate them, the question becomes who's curating and for whose benefit, which is the same that we've always had for behavioral science, that, who's deciding what you see and how you see them, I think will be even more critical, because so far I think behavioral science has been quite blunt. So we've done choice architecture, but there's only ever been broadly 1, 2, 3 manifestations of that choice architecture in the ether at any one time. But imagine a situation where you might have...
I hope we lost Jez for a second. I hope he's coming back. Jez, are you back? Yes,
yeah,
we can hear you now.
Yeah, I'm back. Yeah. So the ethics of curated experiences that are micro segmented and hyper personalized, I think, is the a good AI and behavioral science debate.
Mm-hmm. So we have a question here, and from Flavia, and I'll ask my question after that. Maybe I've missed this, but was this a one-off campaign, or did Egon develop a platform to continue customer education and engagement using this type of approach?
Yeah. So I'll answer it in a slightly different way. Is the pension journey starts broadly at like age 22, and it goes to about 80. So the communication sort of journey, if you like, can be like 60 years. So, you know, the pensions industry starts to really start to go a bit heavier when you get to 45 in like warm up and wake up packs. So the overall communication from pensions businesses.
We're sorry about the internet troubles a little bit, and we'll hopefully get Jez back, and he'll hopefully also repeat his answer. In the meantime, while Jez is finding his way back, Anthony, you have an interesting question here. You mentioned you implemented 36 different behavioral science principles. Oh, Jez, welcome back.
I'm back. Yeah. The technology befuddles us. Yeah.
No problem at all. So could you maybe please repeat your answer to Flavia's question?
Flavia, yeah. So the short answer for the benefit of technology dropouts is I haven't come across a legacy business that has got a single sort of source CRM platform for all its communications. So when you work with a Sky or an Aegon or a British Telecom or a British Airways, they have lots and lots of knitted together back-end systems. And maybe if you're a tech brand, fintech like a Monzo, for sure, because it's been built for the future. So in this instance, these were a one-off platform that linked into their portal for customers, but there's a lot of work that goes knitting into the back end. But there is a customer life cycle journey from cradle to grave, from the age of 22 to the age of 102.
There's another question. You mentioned you implemented 36 different behavioral science principles. Is there a number you think is a lot to manage and include on a video? So what is, I mean, the question is, I guess, what is the threshold? What is still okay and what is too much?
Yeah. So it depends on a number of things. It depends on the nature of the experience and the medium, I think. So, you know, if you think about a video, you know, you've got sound and you've got visuals. So that essentially gives you a greater canvas to play with. And it goes on for 4 minutes. I think we are very, very aware, I think you guys are too, is that when you read an email or a text message and it's got like, I don't know, 5 different behavioral science principles that are nudging you to do something, there does become a point where you feel like you're being shoved. So it doesn't feel quite right because there's too much going on, which doesn't feel so elegant. And I don't think there's a magic number to say it's 21. You know, I don't think we'll ever get to that. But, you know, I think some simple rules of thumb would be something like this. You know, in a letter or an email, 3 or 4 behavioral science principles seems to be optimal. That's what we find. You know, in a conversation that might be 4 minutes long, you know, it might be 10 principles. You know, I think in this video, because there was a lot of visual stimuli and sound, obviously we could go for more. And but I think, you know, if they're elegant, then there's no reason why you can't sort of lay them up. I think it's when it starts to become shoves, then it becomes problematic.
What I find is that there's often a misunderstanding what is a behavioral principle, because many people tend to think of behavioral principles as social proofs and reciprocities and you know, those kind of obvious principles where you're trying, as you said, to nudge the person to do something. But what I consider to be a behavioral principle is incorporating cognitive fluency into your message, and that goes throughout your email, your communication on the website, throughout you know, a video that you create. And there is say information overload or choice overload, and there are so many of these subtle principles which you can pile up on top of each other, and it still feels natural because it only makes the entire experience more pleasant. So absolutely agree that there's not a magic number. It very much depends on what you want to do, and we tend to split the principles into those that try to increase motivation and to get someone to do something, and those that remove barriers.
Yeah.
And very often those that remove barriers, there's not really a limit on how many of those to fit in.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I think so. I think because the world is pretty complex and biological, as I said. I don't think it's it's not physics. And I think where there are some rules which hold true through majority of context. So my kind of sort of, I suppose, very simple understanding is that I think the codex of biases looks beautiful, but I think is pretty useless as a tool. It's like a long list of anything. So some of them are wonky. I think some of them are wacky. But it looks exciting. So I can see why when the Codex of Biases kind of visual came out, and I think it's a beautiful piece of work. But I don't think it's necessarily strategically sort of helpful and robust. I think it actually, as you were saying, that it might create too much choice or too much information, and that might be debilitating, especially when it's got some bits in it that I'm not sure are quite right. But similarly, like the EAST framework, I think the EAST framework is a good framework to talk to people that don't understand behavioral science about why interventions work the way they do. But as a practitioner, I find it quite tricky to utilize it to go deeper into, as you say, kind of some high order principles, some low order tactical, even principles that take away that aren't actually there once you've taken them away. I struggle with that sometimes. So I think EAST is brilliant at describing behavioral science interventions. I don't think it's necessarily the best tool to diagnose and design. So my view is somewhere in between. So it's not 4 principles that govern behavioral science, and it's not 550. Let's work with 20 or 30 that seem to be robust and easy to repeat for good outcomes. So maybe not the answer that the question was trying to get at, but yeah, I think being maybe a bit more scientific. So we are doing something, and you can go to the Cowry website and download the behavioral fingerprint report. What we're trying to do now is identify for common instances in financial services, UX, and retail, what behavioral principles, as you say, get in the way, what are barriers, right? And what seem to come up again and again and again, and what is their valence, like how important or how visible or how do we think they're getting in the way? And then we then have codified, when we design a solution, then what principles we use to overcome those barriers. And then we look at the outcome, which essentially is done on a very kind of simple sort of 1, 2, 3 order of magnitude. And we're utilizing AI to understand what combinations of principles seem to be common and what combinations of principles seem to predict overcoming those to what outcome. And so we're at the early stages of that. So I'm hopefully 3 to 5 years we might be able to get to a better answer, more empirical answer. But right now I think it's not 4 and it's not 550, it's somewhere in between.
Right. And I guess, Marcel, this is also in some extent answer to your question, because Marcel was asking about a full list of all behavioral science principles. If you can recommend a resource where Marcel could find all those principles. I mean, there's a Wikipedia page with, I guess, 150 principles.
Yeah, it's tricky, so I don't think I am aware of a definitive sort of repository of the ones that have been replicated the most, and then also the ones that in business, certainly the area I work in, have been repeated the most. So I don't think it currently sort of exists. I think where we are at Cowry is we translated, rather than saying heuristics and biases, which behavioral science people talk about all the time, but I'd never heard the word heuristic before I came into behavioral science. And as I step out of the behavioral science room and go and chat to normal people in work, no one else has heard of heuristic. So we talk about C factors, which are sort of like cognitive or Cowry factors, and we're up to about 14 that we use consistently, and they're on the Cowry website, and priming is there. So I think we've got to just, I suppose, reframe, I think, that. So based on kind of more recent kind of conversations about priming. But yeah, I think there's something interesting about priming. So I don't think it's gone yet. I think there's more work to be done, because I think there are some very, very deep, hardwired, subconscious priming things that I think would be repeatable if the context was the same all the time. But yeah, I would say, very, very biased. And obviously go to InsideBE. There's so much on InsideBE that essentially brings together a lot of different minded people and businesses. So I think certainly, those two would be where I would go.
And just to add on onto what you just said, I think trying to grasp as many principles as possible is not the right path to applying behavioral science, because in a list of principles you'll read that social proof or social norm is people's tendency to do what others are doing. But what does that actually mean for your business case, for what you're trying to achieve? Because you can apply social proof or social norms in 100 different ways.
Absolutely.
And that's why I believe seeing it applied is so much more powerful. And that was the motivation why we created InsideBE, to enable businesses to find inspiration and to find the answers to how the hell should I apply the theory into practice. And if I could just ask my colleagues to post the link to Jez, your case study on InsideBE, which is honestly one of the most fascinating ones we have there, because it's once again so creative, and it's using the same old principles, nothing super new, but in very creative ways. And I am a true believer in combining data science, behavioral science, and creativity. And if you're able to do that, as like you did in this case study that has just been posted in the chat, I guess you'll achieve amazing results, and you don't need to care about the 100 other principles which you'll never ever be able to use.
I think that is, certainly like the key takeaway that hopefully the audience gets from this is that I remember chatting to Dominic King, who was one of the co-authors of the Mindspace report. So that was back in 2000 I think it was 2009, I think, somewhere around 2010. And basically he said, Jez, he says he does use heuristics. He said the heuristics and biases are out of the bag now, right? It's about how we paint with them and on the canvas that is going to be the differentiator. Like, everybody knows the principles. Like, you might debate about whether they're replication or not, or whatever. Is this ethical or not? Right? That's great. But exactly as you say, like what do you do with them? Because how you portray a social norm. There's so many different ways. We did some work in a food court in a shopping centre once, and we had one poster with one person in it eating a burger and one poster with 4 people eating a pizza. And what we found was more people went to the food court with 4 people. And a hypothesis was, showing more people, does that mean more people go? And they did, and it was empirical, and we did footfall, and it was statistically significant. So, yeah, I mean, you don't read about that in, I suppose some of the papers, because, it's more about the principle. It's not about how actually it's been described and how it's been painted. So yeah, I mean, that's why the job is so fascinating, in the applied space. The applied behavioral science is not an academic exercise. It has different levels and different outcomes that you're looking to achieve. So, yeah, it's an amazing place to work in. So very enjoyable.
Well, at the end of the day, principles are just tools, and what really matters is how you use the tools. And everybody can use them in different ways, and I guess you guys at Cowry are using them in really fascinating ways. So everybody out there, I urge you to check out Cowry's website, go to LinkedIn and follow Jez, and make sure to read Jez's case study on InsideBE and other fascinating articles. Jez, thanks a lot for being here. Thanks a lot for sharing this this fascinating case study, and I hope to have you here soon again.
Brilliant. No, thank you very much, guys. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Have a good night, everybody, and see you soon.